Made up of Revolutionary War officers and soldiers and led by Brigadier General Rufus Putnam of Massachusetts, the Ohio Company of Associates consisted of imperfect men who were facing many obstacles, such as an unstable currency, trouble with Native American populations, and an untamed wilderness. Still, they were sustained by a vision for a secure society that would imitate their beloved New England in the days before all the disruption brought on by years of embargoes and war with Great Britain. They followed the dictates of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that provided the religious and educational opportunities they valued and supported the beloved Republican government they had fought to secure. These first 48 pioneers sought order, law, a replication of their beloved New England, and a stable government that buttressed and in some ways replicated the federal government they desired. These men and their families uprooted their lives and moved into a western wilderness, determined to make the most of the opportunity and create a model town for the new expanding nation.
I'm standing here in front of the Ohio Land Company building. This is the oldest building in the Northwest Territory, and this is the very building from which Rufus Putnam, from the year 1788 when he arrived, managed the land sales, the survey maps, and that kind of thing for this area, for the Northwest Ordinance Territory. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how the men of the Ohio Company of Associates came to own this land. Many people in our area believe that it was because they were Revolutionary War officers and they were just given the land, but that's not what happened. 1.5 million acres of land were set aside and sold to the Ohio Company of Associates. Now, they did have some advantages. They were allowed to use the continental currency, which had become very devalued. They were allowed to use it for its face value in obtaining these lands. And there was some small amount given to them by right because of the work that they had done for the Revolutionary War. The rest of it was sold to the men. And the new government, not having a system in place for taxation, saw land sales as the revenue that they would need to run the new government. So the land sales were very important to the nation. Part of a problem occurred with the currency, however. They didn't pay outright for all the property. Some of it was bought on loans. And when the Constitution was established and when state constitutions became more settled, the currency regained or rebounded some of its money, and that inflation nearly broke the back of the Ohio Company, and they had other struggles along the way as well, but they persevered. I'm here in Marietta on the banks of the Muskingum River, just a short distance from the place where the Muskingum runs into the Ohio River. At that spot, in April of 1788, the men of the Ohio Company of Associates floated down the river looking for that confluence to know that they had reached what would become Marietta. Why did these New England men want to come to this, what was a wilderness, western frontier, rife with problems with Native Americans, and start a new life? The problems that they were facing in their native New England were multiple, and they were largely due to the upset of the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War era and the era preceding that saw Great Britain trying to punish the colonies economically, and New England was hit particularly hard by this. While the nation snapped back pretty quickly after the Revolutionary War, New England was slower to do so. There was social unrest. Lots of towns were burned or damaged by the war, and for these soldiers, and many of the original men who came here to settle Marietta were Revolutionary War officers and soldiers. And many of these men were used to the discipline of army life. And to come into a society that was lacking some political structure, wasn't quite sure who they were yet, and didn't have all the social stability that they sought, being able to come to a new territory and establish something on their own was very attractive. The men who came here were not ordinary men. As I had said before, many of them were Revolutionary War officers. They were men, some of them of learning, but they were men of purpose. The 48 men who originally came to Marietta were chosen specifically because of skills they could provide. They were surveyors, blacksmiths, carpenters, shipbuilders. They were men who were used to being under authority, and they had a unified vision, largely, for what this area could and should become. They were a large degree Federalist. They wanted to see a strong central government established, and they wanted this area of Marietta to have a government that kind of mimicked what was being set up on the federal level. The government here that was first established was not as Republican and Democratic as you would think Revolutionary War veterans would be searching for. The leaders and judges throughout this territory were appointed by the federal government for quite some time, and it would remain that way till the population got to be at least 500, according to the Northwest Ordinance, which was the founding document that guided the behavior of the men who settled here.
We're here with Scott Britton, the director of the Castle Historic House Museum in Marietta. Scott is a local historian. He gives tour of the local Mound Cemetery, and he's also a member of the First Congregational Church in Marietta. We're going to talk to him a little bit about the founding fathers who began this church and what their religious beliefs were. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. The founding of Marietta and the story of the founding of Marietta is really the story of the founding of this church as well. Most are Revolutionary War soldiers or the children of those Revolutionary War soldiers, and most of them are either from Massachusetts, Connecticut, or Rhode Island. They're New Englanders. Most are Puritans, or the descendants of the Puritans. So the founding of the Congregational Church, which brings its roots right back to that, the Puritan group, comes from the New England area down here, and they transported it to Marietta. So this is the beginning of the religious aspects of Marietta. It was founded December the 6th of 1796 in the blockhouse at Campus Martius, what is now the museum, the fortress that was established there. And they wanted to make sure that religious education was continued here in the new territory. The original wooden church was built based on the Hollis Street Church in Boston. Again, they took those ideas and even the architectural plans. If you look at those, an old drawing of that church, it is an exact duplicate of this particular original structure. It burned, it was rebuilt by the trustees, and the day that they opened it back up, 2 days short of the 1-year anniversary of the fire, completely rebuilt, was also completely paid off. Wow. Because of their commitment to the religious aspects and the legacy of this particular church.
I was reading in the diary of Joseph Barker, and he talked about religious freedom being an important aspect of what they practiced while they were in Campus
Sure.
Martius. It was unusual for the time for them to tolerate people who had different beliefs. How much of an issue was that when they were constructing this congregation and founding the town?
Yeah, well, really when you look at the Northwest Ordinance itself, it was a groundbreaking document, particularly for the religious freedom and many other things. If you compare that to the U.S. Constitution, particularly the Bill of Rights, you'll see those original concepts in the Northwest Ordinance. And some that weren't in the Constitution. They couldn't agree on some of those things like slavery, education, treatment of Native Americans, and things of that sort. But those things like writ of habeas corpus, freedom of religion, all of those things are bedrocks that we believe today. Those originally started in the Northwest Ordinance. And one of the bedrocks of that particular document was the freedom of religion. Most of them had their own history back in New England. They had come from those different families that had fled different parts of the world, particularly in England, with the Pilgrims and many other religious societies that came here for a new life to worship as they chose. And they, again, brought those particular beliefs here to Marietta.
They were free. They allowed people the opportunity to worship as they saw fit within the Christian, of
Yeah.
course, the Christian practice.
Sure. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, again, many of them were Revolutionary War soldiers, or the descendants, their fathers or grandfathers had helped free the country from the British rule, and the Church of England and all of those things. Again, we had Church of England folks that moved here and formed the Episcopalian religion. But again, it was all the breakaway and those strict restrictions that were put on not only them, but their ancestors in the past, and they wanted to make sure that this new country and this new concept here in America was always to be free.
Rufus Putnam was the leader of the Ohio Company of Associates from its inception in Massachusetts. He actually came here and led the work that went on in this area in settling it. To give you an idea of how this brigadier general from the Revolutionary War saw the role of Marietta in the new nation, I want to read a quote from a letter he wrote in 1790. He says about Marietta, "And to what country can the inhabitants of the Massachusetts immigrate so much to her advantage as the Ohio? Is it not for the interest of New England that the western country should in their manners, morals, religion, and policy take the eastern states for their model? Is the genius, education, etc. of any people so favorable to the Republican government as theirs? And should they not then, by throwing in of their citizens, endeavor to take the lead and give a tone to the new states forming in the western quarter?" He, along with the rest of the Ohio Company, believed that New England should be a model for this area. So these very prepared pioneers moved to Marietta, and what they brought with them were their ideals of morals, religion, education, and governance. They wanted to see a government that mimicked the national government. They wanted to see law and order. From a book that he wrote called The Ohio Frontier, an author with the last name of Hurt said, "Marietta began to gain social control with the aid of a capable police, which enforced the Code of 1788, the founding year for Marietta. Morality would be achieved in the New England way, with public whippings for a host of offenses." They early on established their code of conduct. They based all that they did on the Northwest Ordinance, and they had strict law and order that they inculcated into the area. In the founders' minds, religion and education were inseparable. As such, they set aside land through the Northwest Ordinance. Land was set aside in each area for education and religion. In an article Rufus Dawes wrote about this issue, he says, quote, "They set aside one lot of 640 acres in each township for the support of religion and an equal extent of land for the support of schools. And in addition to that," end quote, "in addition to that, they set aside land specifically for institutions of higher learning. The first of those appeared early on in Marietta in the first few years. It was called Muskingum Academy. It was later to become Marietta College. They are still in operation in Marietta. The men who settled the Ohio Company did so with a sense of vision for the future, and they sought to bring what they knew and what they believed in, which was the New England model of life, to this Midwestern town. That makes Marietta unique in many aspects.